You may have never heard of the Anakim, a mysterious tribe mentioned in the sacred scriptures, a lineage of giants who, millennia ago, roamed the lands of Canaan and Mesopotamia. These enigmatic beings are cited by ancient commentators and historians, considered one of the most legendary tribes of the ancient Near East, surrounded by myths of power, immense stature, and celestial origin. In this video, we will explore who the Anakim were, their origins, their stories, and the hidden secrets that have survived through the ages. Prepare to dive into one of the most intriguing chapters of ancient history. The name Anak appears several times in the Old Testament, and in some biblical translations, it is rendered as Inak, although the oldest and most accurate form is Anak. In the Phoenician and Archaic Hebrew languages, the word Anak means necklace or ornament for the neck, a symbol of distinction, power, or lineage. However, the roots of this word go much deeper. The term Anak did not originate in Hebrew or Phoenician. It is an echo from an even older tongue. In Sumerian, the tongue of the first civilizations of Mesopotamia, Anak corresponds to the term Anaki, which literally carried the meaning the descendants from above, or those who came from heaven. Over time, this word traveled through the ages, from Sumerian to Akkadian, the language spoken in Ur of the Chaldees, the very birthplace of Abraham, and later to ancient Aramaic, the language of the Israelites, until finally reaching Phoenician Hebrew. Phoenician, in turn, was a northwest Semitic language spoken by a people of sailors and merchants who inhabited the coasts of the Levant, present-day Lebanon, parts of Syria, and Israel. It was this people who created one of the most ancient and influential alphabets of humanity, the foundation of later systems such as Greek and, later on, Latin, which we still use today. Their writing system consisted of 22 consonants, with no explicit vowels, similar to early Hebrew, and it carried the record of one of the most sophisticated civilizations of its time. The meaning of Anak, in its most primitive form, both in Sumerian and Akkadian, can be translated as the sons of those who fell from heaven, and thus they are called in the scriptures the sons of Anak. The expression therefore holds the same sense, descendants of those who descended from heaven, beings whose origins seem to transcend the limits of the human world. During the Israelite conquest of Canaan, one of the most mysterious and grand chapters of the Old Testament, the name Anak emerges from the pages of scripture as the ancestor of a tribe that seemed to belong to another age. The Anakim, his descendants, were known for their colossal stature, their almost superhuman strength, and for a countenance that, according to the ancients, bore something otherworldly. It was said their eyes reflected the brilliance of the stars, and that their voices, when echoing through the valleys of Canaan, made the ground tremble. These giants, according to sacred accounts, were a distant echo of an age when the divine and the earthly still intertwined, an age before the flood, when celestial beings, called in ancient traditions the Watchers, descended to earth and took human wives, generating a hybrid race of warriors and titans. This forbidden lineage was nearly wiped out by the purifying waters of the flood, yet fragments of it survived, and among those remnants were the sons of Anak. Deuteronomy 2:10 mentions that the Anakim were related to the Rephaim, an even older and more mysterious lineage described as a people of great stature and strength, inhabitants of ancient cities such as Bashan and Ashtaroth, regions later associated with Og, king of Bashan, the last of the giants mentioned in scripture. These beings were so formidable that ordinary warriors trembled at the mere mention of their name. When Moses sent 12 spies to explore the Promised Land, the reports that returned were beyond imagination. 10 of them confessed before the whole assembly that they had seen men of impossible size, beings whose height defied human logic. Some scholars estimate that according to ancient measurements, an Anakite could reach between 13 and 15 feet tall, over 4 meters, and that they wielded spears as large as tree trunks. Their armor was forged from bronze and iron, so heavy that an entire army would be needed to move it. The spies said, "There we saw the descendants of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we were, in our own sight, as grasshoppers." Fear swept through the camp. The idea of facing creatures who seemed like fallen gods paralyzed the hearts of many Israelites. But Caleb and Joshua, moved by a faith that transcended reason, stood against despair. They did not deny the reality of the giants, but affirmed that, with the God of Israel, even the highest mountains could be brought down. "The Lord is with us," said Caleb. "Do not be afraid of them." That phrase would become legendary, the memory of a moment when faith faced the impossible. From then on, the Anakim came to represent, for the Hebrews, more than mere enemies. They became the living symbol of the forces that defy divine purpose, the lingering shadows of the ancient celestial rebellion that still echoed upon the earth. In the books of Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Judges, the Anakim reappear as remnants of an earlier age, survivors of a time when the earth still bore the scars of the intervention of the sons of God. Their cities were said to be fortified with colossal stones, their thrones carved from blocks so massive that even modern archaeologists struggle to comprehend how they were built. Among the heroes who faced these beings was Caleb once more. Years later, now an old man yet still full of vigor, he returned to Hebron, the land where he had first seen the giants. Before him stood the three legendary chiefs of the Anakim, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, sons of Anak. Caleb fought them with the same youthful fire that had once driven him, and according to tradition, he defeated all three in battle, reclaiming the very land that had once filled him with terror. That region was known for an ancient city called Kiriath Arba, named after Arba, the greatest of the Anakim, a giant whose height, according to old rabbinic texts, exceeded the stature of 7 men standing one upon another. Hebron, the new name given to the city after its conquest, became one of the holiest places in Israel, an eternal reminder that faith triumphed over fear, and that the giants who once ruled the land were defeated by divine promise. But the echoes of that race did not fade easily. Ancient writings, forgotten fragments, and oral traditions preserved across various cultures, Sumerian, Canaanite, Egyptian, and Hebrew, tell of similar beings, colossal men of immense strength, sometimes revered as gods, other times feared as monsters. Some accounts claim that when their bodies fell in battle, the earth itself trembled, and that their bones were so large they were used as markers along ancient roads. As the centuries passed, modern scholars tried to reinterpret these stories, suggesting that the giants were merely metaphors for powerful nations or dynasties. Yet the original texts, written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and ancient Greek, preserve nuances that point toward a darker origin. In them, the words Nephilim and Rephaim appear in distinct contexts, referring to beings not entirely human, descendants of a union between the celestial and the earthly, the offspring of the Watchers who corrupted God's creation. This interpretation finds support in the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956 in the caves of Qumran. These scrolls, dating from 250 BC to 68 AD, are an invaluable archaeological treasure. Among them are nearly complete copies of the Old Testament, along with apocryphal and mystical writings that speak explicitly of a time when angels descended to earth and taught humankind forbidden arts, metallurgy, enchantments, and warfare. In one fragment known as the Book of Giants, found among the Qumran scrolls, there is mention of the hybrid offspring of the Watchers who devoured all the works of men, whose wickedness provoked divine wrath and led to the Great Flood. These passages reinforce the idea that the Anakim and the Nephilim were survivors of that ancient epoch, living remnants of a celestial transgression. Most of the scrolls are written in Hebrew, some in Aramaic, and others in Greek, revealing the details of an ancient faith that believed heaven and earth had once touched, with catastrophic consequences. Among the worn lines of these sacred texts echoes the memory of hybrid beings, warriors, and ancient kings, the giants of Canaan, whose bones time has swallowed, but whose memory still resonates like distant thunder, coming from an era when giants walked among men. Thus, across the oldest writings and traditions preserved by the civilizations of the Near East, runs a common thread spanning the centuries. The conviction that the giants, including the Anakim, were direct descendants of the fallen angels, the watchers of ancient lore. These celestial beings allegedly transgressed the boundaries of heaven, seducing the daughters of men and giving rise to a hybrid race, endowed with superhuman power, wisdom, and strength, but corrupted by a rebellious nature. These hybrids were described as beings of immense size, whose presence dominated the plains of Canaan, the hills of Bashan, and the fortresses of the ancient city-states. It was said that their skin reflected the gleam of bronze in the sun, that their footsteps made the ground tremble, and that their voices had the weight of distant thunder. The peoples of the region saw them as children of heaven and earth, half angels and half men, the last remnants of a time when the gods walked among mortals. Even in the face of this convergence of ancient sources, biblical, Jewish, Sumerian, and Egyptian, many modern scholars have attempted to reinterpret these narratives, reducing them to legends, metaphors, or poetic exaggerations. They claimed that the giants were merely warriors of great stature, tribal chiefs who, over generations, were transformed into myths. But the testimonies of antiquity, inscribed in stone, clay, and parchment, tell another story, a story of fear, power, and forbidden memories. Among the most impressive pieces of evidence are the Egyptian execration texts, dating from the Middle Kingdom period, circa 2055 BC to 1650 BC. These artifacts were used in cursing rituals. The names of enemies and foreign kingdoms were inscribed on clay figurines and jars, which were then ritually broken, symbolizing the destruction of the enemy before the gods. In some of these lists, references appear to peoples of ancient Canaan, and among them, one name stands out, Ionic, a term that many Egyptologists associate with the expression people of Anak. This discovery is extraordinary, as it shows that the fame of the Anakim extended beyond the borders of Canaan and was known even in the courts of the pharaohs, thousands of kilometers to the south. The Egyptians feared these tribes, describing them as people of immense stature and indomitable strength, servants of foreign deities whom the pharaohs sought to curse in order to preserve the balance of the cosmos. In certain fragments of these texts, the names of 3 rulers of the Anakim appear: Jiram, Abamu, and Ayam, names that intrigue historians. Some believe that these were ancestors of the biblical chiefs Sesai, Aiman, and Talmai, mentioned in the Book of Joshua. Others suggest that they may have been kings of the first generation of giants, perhaps older brothers of those who faced the Israelites centuries later. According to ancient Hebrew traditions, the Anakim lived much longer than ordinary men, reaching hundreds of years, which would explain how their names and deeds became living legends. The writer and mythologist Robert Graves, in his analyses of the mythological origins of Mediterranean civilizations, explored this connection between East and West. He observed that the term Anak might be related to the Greek word anax, meaning lord, king, or sovereign god, a title used for giant kings and primordial deities in archaic Greece. Thus, it is possible that the echo of the name Anak crossed the boundaries of time and culture, appearing in various languages to designate the rulers of a titanic age that preceded recorded human history. Graves went further. He proposed that the Anakim could correspond to the Anakoiroi of Hellenic tradition, divine kings or titans who ruled during the Golden Age, when gods and giants walked side by side upon the earth. These ancient kings were not merely powerful humans, but living symbols of the union between the sacred and the profane, beings whose existence marked the point of rupture between our world and the spiritual world. What is most fascinating and terrifying about the traditions concerning the Anakim is the description of their incomprehensible stature and strength. Hebrew chronicles, Ugaritic texts, and apocryphal writings describe them as men 4 to 5 meters tall, capable of lifting stones that hundreds of ordinary men could not move. Some texts speak of swords the size of palm trees, shields heavier than entire oxen, and a near invincible resilience. It was said that a single strike from an Anakite could shatter the bronze shield of an Israelite warrior. Even the smaller among them, according to estimates by archaeologists and scholars like Graves, stood over 3 meters tall. Their bones, if ever found, might easily be mistaken for those of prehistoric beasts. Their walls and fortresses, such as those of Hebron and Bashan, were built with stone blocks that defy the known construction techniques of their era. Some rabbinic accounts describe how, when the Israelites approached the Promised Land, they saw the Anakim from afar, training with enormous stones and leaping from hill to hill, as though the weight of the earth could not hold them down. Their bodies, it is said, were not like those of men, denser, stronger, and with a strange radiance in their eyes, a lingering trace of the celestial light inherited from the Watchers. Thus, whether in Hebrew scriptures, Greek myths, or Egyptian curses, the image of the Anakim remains consistent. Kings of flesh and stone, descendants of a corrupted celestial lineage whose memory still haunts the world today. Their stories are remnants of an age when the divine and the earthly collided violently, leaving behind only ruins, bones, and echoes of a lost glory. But it was not only their size that set them apart. Graves described the Anakim as beings endowed with tremendous strength and astonishing speed, capable of rapid movements and devastating blows even while wearing heavy armor and wielding massive weapons. Their endurance, too, was legendary. The author mentions that some, such as Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, were grievously wounded in battle, brought to the brink of death, and yet survived. Those same names appear in Scripture, in the books of Joshua and Judges, described as surviving warriors who, though struck down, continued to be feared by all who lived around them. Beyond the biblical accounts, testimonies from many cultures reinforce the presence of these giants. The Egyptian execration texts, already mentioned, include direct references to the tribe of the Anakim. Echoes of their existence also appear in Phoenician and Aramaic inscriptions, which speak of colossal beings from time immemorial, and even in the Quran, where there are mentions of giant nations destroyed by divine judgment. These convergences between Egyptian, Semitic, biblical, and Islamic traditions seem to point to the same ancestral memory, that of a race of giant men, sons of those who fell from heaven, whose presence profoundly marked the consciousness of ancient civilizations. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, one of the most respected chroniclers of the 1st century, also made extensive references to the existence of ancient giants in his works, describing not only the Anakim, but several other colossal tribes that inhabited the earth in the earliest times. With the keen eye of both historian and guardian of Hebrew tradition, Josephus recounts in detail the astonishing appearance of these beings. He writes, "For this reason they removed their camp to Hebron, and when they took it, they slew all the inhabitants. Until then, there remained a race of giants there, whose bodies were so large and their countenances so unlike to other men's, that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing." This vivid, almost cinematic description reveals how the giants were seen with a mixture of fear and awe, regarded not merely as enormous in stature, but strange in form and presence, as though belonging to another order of beings altogether. Josephus also records that, in his own time, the bones of these giants could still be seen, displayed as relics in certain regions, a direct testimony to their existence. Unlike ordinary human remains, these gigantic bones showed abnormal proportions, reinforcing the idea that they were not simply tall men, but members of a distinct, perhaps even hybrid lineage, one whose origins traced back to that forbidden union between heaven and earth. As the centuries passed, it appears that the tribe of the Anakim was eventually annihilated, destroyed by the Israelites and other neighboring peoples during the wars of conquest. Despite their strength and size, they were overcome by human persistence and faith. Few survived, and among those remnants, legends and myths were born. Some were said to have been revered as demigods, others hired as warriors or mercenaries, and among them rose a name that would echo forever through the scriptures: Goliath, the Philistine giant defeated by the young David. Others, less remembered, vanished into the mists of history, hunted, destroyed, and forgotten. Yet their traces remain in the pages of the Bible, in ancient accounts, in lost inscriptions, and in stories that span millennia. They are fragments of a memory that refuses to fade, a reminder that, in some distant age, giants truly walked among men. If you wish to delve deeper into this mystery, to understand its origins, its connection to the fallen angels, and its presence in biblical, apocryphal, and archaeological texts, leave your request in the comments. There is much more to be revealed about the giants of Scripture and the legacy they left behind. May God bless you, and I'll see you soon.